situated, one of the things I would love to see, any businesses in the room that have been impacted by natural disasters or any type of extreme weather disruption. Could have been the last 5 years, and according to Hannah, it could have been from the last 100 years. So, anybody in the room? Raise your hand high. Let's see. Nice, nice. I see some folks in the front and in the back. How about personally? Anyone that has experienced flooding in your home? Any type of disruption? I know all of our hands should be up to be, because quite honestly, I'm wondering whether or not my flight's going to be disrupted today because of the extreme weather this afternoon. So that's a joke inside, but we all have been, I am quite worried about that, but we all have been impacted by natural disasters and extreme weather. Good morning, gentlemen. I am glad to be the woman moderator today. But I want to also introduce our panel quickly. We have, and if you could raise your hand just so folks know who you guys are. We have Bob Carey. He has been recently nominated by Governor Janet Mills and confirmed by the state Senate to be the superintendent of Maine Bureau of Insurance in February 2024. Mr. Carey, awesome. We also have Michael Durkin, Director of Emergency Management Agency for Cumberland County, Maine. Nice to see you, Mr. Durkin. Sean Diffie, who is the Engineering Director at Allagash Brewery. Let's give it up for Allagash Brewery. And we also have Patrick Woodcock, who is joined and he is the President and CEO of the Maine State Chamber of Commerce. Thank you, gentlemen, for your participation today. So I wanted to start with just a little bit of the reason why M&T Bank is concerned about this conversation. As Emily introduced us before, my name is LaKendra McNair. I am the Senior Vice President. I lead our Climate Resilient Communities work. And part of that, when we talk about the community, our small businesses are the heartbeat of our communities. And I'm believing it's the same for Maine. So we wanted to kind of make sure that we are amplifying the work that you guys are doing here and also sharing some information with our business community. According to the recent survey by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, 94% of small businesses believe they are ready to handle disasters, but only 26% have actually in place a disaster plan. In Maine, 99.2% of businesses are considered small businesses, and over 50% of Maine's employees network is a part of the small business community. The sustainable success in the face of disaster and challenge is extremely important, and this is why we all are here today. I would also like to reiterate, I think Hannah had mentioned some of the things about your Maine's action plan. According to Maine Infrastructure, Rebuilding and Resilience Commission, in recent decades, Maine has experienced an average of 1 disaster or emergency declaration annually. That's a lot. However, since March 2022, Maine has seen 8 disaster declarations and 1 emergency declaration. So when we're talking about that curve and the work that we're looking to do together and narrowing it, I think that's really important. So gentlemen, we're going to put you on the spot today, and we're going to start by talking about business resilience and how can the businesses and the individuals and consumers in the room play a part in this work. Between 2023, December 2023, and January 2024, Maine experienced a series of the most severe storms in the state's history and subsequent flooding, which caused significant damage to coastal communities and their infrastructure. What was the most impactful learning around business operations that became a priority to keep front of mind today? And I'll start and turn that question over to Bob first.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me this morning. I was asked by the governor to serve on the Rebuilding and Resilience Commission that she formed in April and May of 2024, and so we went across the state to hear firsthand from local officials, county officials, emergency management officials, and the thing that struck me was the widespread nature of the storms. So we went to Norway and Rumford in western Maine. We went to Machias, which is in down east in Washington County, York, we went to Old Orchard. I think that I was struck most by the severity and the wide geographic distribution of the damage. And to see it firsthand and to hear from local officials firsthand was, it was impressive in the extreme. And so out of that, I'll give a shameless plug for the Bureau of Insurance. We don't take any general revenue fees. All of our money that's spent to support the Bureau of Insurance is generated through fees on the insurance industry. So agents and brokers and producers and insurance companies and others, they pay a fee if they want to do business in Maine. And over the years, we've accumulated a sizable surplus. So the $35 million that went to support LD1 came not from your taxes, but from insurance fees that were accumulated by the Bureau of Insurance over 10 years. And so I've been there for 2 years. I've been the superintendent for almost 2 years. And one of the first things I did is I looked at the fund and said, why are we sitting on $50 million? Can't we put this to good use for Maine people and Maine business? And so that's what we did, working with the governor's office and Hannah Pingree, who was head of GOPIF at the time. She really was the lead person from the governor's staff that looked at what are the various ways that we can help Mainers. And it's not just widening culverts, but it's also making businesses more resilient or elevating utility infrastructure so that it's out of harm's way when the storm comes, not if the storm comes. So that was my takeaway from that commission and those events. We've been lucky, right? Since January or March maybe of 24, we haven't had any major storms, but we will. And the learning from the 23 and 24 storms still is pretty resonant.
Awesome, thank you, Bob. Peter, I'll take your approach next and then I'll go down the line.
Right now?
I'm sorry, Michael.
Sure. I'm Michael, County EMA Director. I think for us, it kind of underscored there was a notable difference between the businesses that had plans, that had some sort of disaster plan, and one that did not have any sort of disaster plan. The storms you referenced actually provided an interesting kind of counterpoint. You're right, there were 3 of them, quick succession. It was a serious event for the state of Maine. And we haven't, dare I say, had a disaster of that level since COVID. And COVID was a very different sort of disaster, right? Still a disaster, for sure, but a very different type. And what we found was, in Maine, winter storms and stuff, that's kind of our bread and butter, right? That's the disaster we kind of expect to see a lot. But we'd seen a lot of people's plans had been adapted for COVID, or maybe even they had no plan, and COVID really forced people to make plans. So a lot of businesses that had no plans now have a pandemic flu plan, and then a hurricane or a big winter storm comes, and they look at their pandemic flu plan, and they're like, this doesn't fully prepare me for what I need. So there was kind of a misalignment we saw. Businesses that were really resilient, the ones that I think kind of thrived the most, were either had a generic kind of cross-disaster plan that's usable in a bunch of different scenarios, or they were able to take the elements from their COVID plan and apply them to the current disaster, right? And it could be anything from supply chain resiliency to, everybody can work from home now. So that's a whole shift. And there were some businesses that were able to say, hey, we learned how to work from home 3 years ago. Everybody go home. Awesome. If that's a solution you can do, then that works. But for us, we saw the notable difference in plans. Because whenever there's a sizable storm or any sizable disaster, we'll start getting phone calls from businesses saying, hey, what do I need to do to prepare for this? And the first thing we say is, well, you need to make a plan. And they say, how do I make a plan? And then we go, okay. And then we meet with them and we kind of walk them through the whole process. So for us, one of the main overlaps we have with businesses is in their plans and planning, and that's where we saw the difference really highlighted.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. And Sean and Patrick, it'd be nice to get a business perspective from that.
Sure. I'm Sean Diffley. I'm the engineering director at Allagash Brewing Company. I've been there for 14 years. I haven't been in Maine my whole life, but I've been here long enough to nurse a couple of storms, and with my role at Allagash, I look after all the facilities, all the capital projects, and also IT as well. So going back to like the 23 storms and even before then, the nature of brewing beer and manufacturing beer is a continuous operation. So we've always had to have like emergency preparedness plans because we need to be able to not stop the process. So we've been lucky enough to be able to, with Rob's, independent ownership, been able to invest in systems and preparedness plans to have like generators, for example, on standby and to run through like large, power outages or any other kind of event like that. From a business preparedness perspective, like as Kevin kind of alluded to there on supply chain resilience and looking at more keeping supply chains closer to ourselves, like in state, how we can get product to us in a disaster area. A couple of other things that we've looked at, and we've actually leaned on the insurance industry too, and our insurers to take advantage of programs that they may have for small businesses like ourselves to audit our systems and go like, okay, here's what you can do as a small business to help yourself for emergency preparedness or climate preparedness. But I think my stuff is more practical from a business or a manufacturing owner, and I'm happy to take questions on this later on, but we're looking at business preparedness or emergency preparedness all the time because we have to continually operate regardless of the weather, regardless of what the storm is, so we're always prepared.
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation today. Patrick Woodcock with the Maine State Chamber of Commerce. I think it revealed the fragility of our economy. We raised with other business groups about $500,000 for micro grants along the Kennebec River, where businesses really were struggling to quickly pivot to be prepared to open for the spring season. Similar to the pandemic, that just what kind of cash they have available. I think it revealed limitations of the flood insurance program that I think is worth a whole nother discussion. I think it also focused us on the importance of our working waterfront infrastructure in a way that we have never experienced. I think we all see the picturesque views of our wharfs and what that really means for our economy. I applaud the administration, the legislature in a bipartisan way of moving so quickly on LD1. There was a discussion about the funding, but not only that, a resilience office. I think a component of a climate strategy needs to integrate the insurance industry. And similar to our efforts on climate mitigation, our heat pump success is tailor-made to Maine's greenhouse gas emissions. Similarly, we really need a strategy for the resilience that is data informed. I know MEMA put out a report just this last week on safety of using heating systems. Talking to my insurance companies of Maine, some of the biggest issues are during an electrical outage, people using unsafe heating appliances. And sadly, we had a loss of life in the last 24 hours, a total loss of home using those facilities. That's a unique thing for Maine, and it goes into some of the discussions about resilience of our electrical infrastructure. Mainers, the affluent Mainers, are rushing to put in generators. That doesn't work for a lot of low-income households. And it goes into how we think about utility infrastructure, not only from a safety standpoint, but also from an insurance standpoint.
Nice. Thank you all for your responses. And some of the things that I heard and we were talking about earlier with some of the small businesses is COVID. It keeps coming up. And the need to have preparedness discussions. When I was doing my homework on the gentleman up here, there was something that stood out on LinkedIn, because that's where I do some of my homework. Michael had a quote on your page. You talked about the wealth of experience in translating data, to your point, Patrick. And then you said, for me, this is where relationship came in. I love growing teams, coalitions, and partnerships. One of the things, even as M&T Bank, that we found during COVID was the importance of building trust, data and information, and shared knowledge in that space. So gentlemen, if you could just, and I'll pose this question to you first, Michael. Can you provide insight on how entrepreneurs use these same type of transferable soft skills, building trust, coalitions, and partnerships? How is that important when we talk about strengthening business resilience?
Absolutely. I feel a sudden need to update my LinkedIn. Follow me for more hot takes. I think the key word there that always strikes out to me is partnership, right? That's the biggest, most important thing we see in disasters. I would say it's the thing that makes a disaster. Is if something really horrible happens to you, that's a tragedy. I'm sorry. But if something really horrible happens to a community, that's a disaster, right? That's the difference. That's the nature of what a disaster is the impact is actually community-wide, which means it's not something you as a sole person can dig out of, because the whole systems that undergird our society are damaged. So it's something, basically disasters require teams. It's as simple as that. Emergency management is a team sport. And those partnerships become really key. And the best thing to do is figure out who do you need on your team, right? There's some people you're already working with that you probably work with all the time, and you're like, oh, I definitely need them. But who else would you need on your team in those big disasters, right? And what needs to be done now to build that team, right? Because once the snow is already falling and the power suddenly snaps off, that's not the best time to be making the team, right? It's kind of ironic that the question begins with LinkedIn and it's focused on partnerships, right? That's not the time to find me on LinkedIn, is during the disaster, because I'm not checking it then. So build those partnerships right now and be really deliberate about what you need to build those things. It could be very different for your business, right? It could be a really key important thing that you know what high school your delivery guy, what the delivery driver went to. That might be a really key thing to keeping that relationship. Or you might have vendors on the West Coast and you need to build a relationship, across time zones, and that's an entirely different sort of thing. So every team looks really different, but start wrapping your head around who's on my team in this sort of disaster. It also has a really nice effect of, as soon as there is a big emergency, everybody tends to kind of turtle up a little bit and go, okay, it's me against the world. It's really not. It's a team sport. It's for everybody. And so by building that plan out, it also kind of removes one of those main fear factors that hits people in disasters. Because you go, oh yeah, this is a really difficult situation, but there's a whole lot of people working on this in a lot of different areas. So it also helps to kind of psychologically boost and push people through big events as well.
I think that was important. One of the things that we talked about earlier during COVID, that was when I think resources and information was worth more than an actual government contract at the time. We were talking about the piece of how we think about money and our relationships, always thinking about the revenue coming in, but it's also those that have resources and connection for our holistic business approach. So with that being said, Patrick, the Chamber of Commerce nationally and locally is known as an anchor in the community and trusted advisor. What would you see? How can you elaborate a little bit more when it talks about partnership in the business community?
Well, we heard the presentation this morning. These are big topics that are going to be guiding public policy for generations. They can divide us, on what public policy should we do for climate mitigation to have a sustainable planet. These are big topics. A lot of these things can divide us nationally. I think about bringing up by community of what is local, what are some regional solutions, what is Stonington doing to really bring the community together that may make this a healthier economy? What can bring different perspectives on these issues that actually this makes sense for our local community? I think at this moment of division, I'm starting to think about trying to really localize it. That's where the trust can emerge. I think we need more pragmatism in public policy. So I do think that if there's one thing that I would say that Maine can lead on, we are a collection of local economies and really trying to amplify and support those communities to create a plan that works for them. I do think Maine can be a leader in this. We have so much riding on making sure that our natural resources, our business community can thrive, and also that we really, I think, showcase that Maine has had some pragmatism with climate leadership that other states are adopting.
Awesome. Sean, you mentioned something earlier about having local vendors. I think it's one of those why I kept secrets. When COVID happened, one of the things we started turning to as a bank is started asking questions about who are the vendors of the businesses that we're lending to, right? So I think that vendor relationships is very key and something that we should be talking about and thinking about when we talk about resilience. I'd love to get your information. You had talked about some tips on vendor and supply chain relations when you think about in respect to winter storms or even just business disruption.
I'll start with kind of just addressing the community one first. I think it's very important that Patrick and Michael brought up is that as Patrick mentioned, or Michael mentioned, the disaster is a community. When it is a disaster, it's a community. It's not affecting just you, it's affecting everyone around you. One thing that we've been really active in is in the local community, both with our peers and our partner businesses that are along our industrial way over in Portland or here in Scarborough, being active with the chamber, both Portland and in Maine, being active just in our community, and then having like a shared resource when a disaster happens, so we can rely on each other for tips, or like for our neighbors on the street, we've got a generator, but not all of them may have it, so they can come and use our facilities. I think that's important to do when it's not a disaster, so that you are ready for the disaster. Being active and inviting the local municipality into your business, and for example, knowing when the snowplow is going to come down the street is really important to us, because we're going to get grain trucks in and out of the facility regardless of the weather. So I think that's just very important, that everyone should understand what is around you and in your area and your community to help you in that disaster, and don't wait for the disaster to make those connections. On the supply chain side, we're really always actively looking at where our ingredients come from, where raw materials come from. Beer is simple. We get water from Lake Sebago, it's piped right in there, it's pretty easy. Grain is a whole different story. Grain is a commodity, typically comes from the Midwest. Over the years, we've gotten more and more grain from the Midwest via intermodal transport, rail cars, onto trucks in Vermont, and then down the road up to Portland. But what we've done over the last 5 to 6 years is really look internally to the state of Maine of how we can get grain from the state of Maine by using the rotational crop from potatoes up in the county. So back in 2018, we committed to having 1 million pounds of grain by 2021 from the state of Maine, and that has really helped our resilience. We started with about 50,000 pounds in 2018. This year we'll end up around 2 million pounds of grain from the county, and basically a closer relative relationship to the source of the grain to us, which reduces transport costs, it's sustainable, it's good for the community, it's good for the farming community in Maine, and it makes us more resilient because we can get that crop easier. And that was a big deal for us, and that kind of just...
I feel like we got a cheers to that.
Yeah, that's great.
It's less expensive, it's better for our product, it's better quality, we have a direct relationship with the farmer, and we're not relying on that commodity market for that product in particular. But again, during a disaster, we don't have to rely on a truck coming from Vermont, for example, or a rail car getting stuck somewhere. We rely on a direct relationship with the truck driver and the farmer from the county.
That's awesome. That was worth sharing. That was great numbers. Bob, I'll come back to you. Speaking of relationships, can you share a little bit about what your advice is for businesses and consumers when it comes to insurance? We talked about a big focus on insurance. What does that relationship look like? Usually we think of it as just something to do, a checklist, but we haven't really talked about the relationship with your insurance broker.
Yes, thank you for that. My favorite insurance company is a company called FM, which used to be FM Global, and they do not employ a single actuary. They're essentially an engineering firm that also sells insurance. So if you're going to get covered by FM, they're going to go to your company, your business, and other insurance companies do this too. This isn't a shameless shill for a Rhode Island company, as a Rhode Island boy. But they go and make sure that your building is situated and structured, and the utilities are placed above grade, and they do other things to make sure that you won't file a claim, right? That's the insurance company. The first time you talk to your insurance company shouldn't be when you file a claim. I would argue you probably should talk to your insurance company at least annually, or talk to your broker at least annually. They have experts that can go to your facility and point out areas of weakness, or where you should be thinking about developing a plan. Do you have a safety plan? Who plows your snow? What's your contract look like? If someone slips and falls, you can't point to the guy who was supposed to shovel the walkway. It's probably going to be on you to pay the claim. So just thinking more holistically and thinking of your insurer and your broker as partners and not really people that you call after the fact. I mean, people like to point to insurance as saying, well, the flood insurance will cover it. Well, newsflash, it's probably not going to cover all the damage, even if you have flood insurance, which most people don't. That has serious limits on what they'll cover. So I would argue that you should look to insurers and the broker as someone who you can call to discuss your plan and how you can best weather the storm. If you can't get your people into the office or into the facility, you can't run. So how are you going to do that? And so that I would argue is if you take away one thing about insurance today, is maybe, after the holidays, call your broker, make an appointment with him, or call your insurance company, and have them take a look at your business and see, are you prepared for different weather events?
Green. We used to say during COVID, you want to make sure that you have your starting 5, right, in business. Your banker was one of your starting 5 partners, and your insurance broker was the other. And really making sure that you have them work for you, not you just working for them or paying them. So being active with your banker and having that same touch point with them, and the same thing from your insurance broker. We had an event about a year ago with SBA and a large insurance company. And one of the things that came out that a lot of small businesses said is, I didn't know that if I had a preparedness plan in place, I could let my insurance know. And they're like, oh, well, we might even consider that when we think about your premiums and pricing. Because you're being proactive and you're communicating with us and making sure that you have the right types of insurance. So I know we'll touch a little bit on that further, but great points. Thank you so much for that. Patrick and Sean, I'll turn to you. One of the things you talked about was vulnerabilities in businesses. So we always say as bankers, be vulnerable with your banker and tell us, where are the gaps? Where do you need help? What are some of the gaps or vulnerabilities when you think about what's impeding businesses for preparation and thinking about resilience? What are the gaps there, and how can we think about that more broadly?
I'll just begin that we're a state of small businesses. The understanding of insurance market is limited for a lot of small businesses. I think we're at a point where, similar to the Great Recession, that caused an economic, political ripple effect that really is long-lasting. Similarly, the inflationary pressures that we have experienced is rippling through the economy. We usually think about inflation with groceries, housing. This has had a major impact in insurance. A lot of properties are not insured at their appraised value now, and I think intuitively people think that's actually a good deal. It's not. We're underinsured because replacement costs have gone up. I also do think that in insurance, we have had the additional pressure of major losses nationally. California, Florida, Louisiana, that is exacerbating these pressures. So I think companies, a lot of insurance companies, not all the best ones, are really floundering on how to have a data-informed response to doing more outreach. I own some properties and I've had the insurance company review them. They're not appropriate for Maine on some of the recommendations. What is the risk profile? They are doing examinations that are not fitting the risk profile. Because there's so many losses going on, there is a rush right now. So I think creating some best practices for companies to really what are the risks for Maine and having those solutions for business owners. We are underinsured right now in Maine, and that is a big risk.
I love that. He talked about solutions, and we're going to talk about it, and you're actually going to have hands-on later on with CEI with the toolkit, so I love that you mentioned that. Sean, you're just ahead of the game with everything. I mean, you turned apples into an orchard. when you did the
Apples,
grant.
we turn apples into cider.
So I gotta ask this. I mean, one of the best ways to really understand and make this digestible is, where do businesses falter? Has there been an example for you guys that was a growing pain when it comes to preparation that you learned from, and you, whether it was, the supply chain disruption, what is that vulnerability that you've experienced or that you see in some of your vendors that some of the audience can learn from?
So the most realistic, like outside of like big, the power goes out disasters where we're pretty lucky to have the generator. Like we do take advantage of the insurance companies. We have a walkthrough every single year. It's on 3 different levels. It's on the facility level, like to look at mechanical systems, like what's our utility kind of look like, how do we make sure that we're prepared for stuff. It's on a safety level, so we take the insurance companies, basically free audit of our facility to make sure that OSHA is not auditing us. It's the insurance company, and we're prepared to have an OSHA audit come through on that fact, because you don't want OSHA just to walk in. And then lastly, that I'll kind of elaborate more on is the digital side. So one thing I think people forget, like you're getting your systems up and running, your payment system, for example, could be all cloud-based. It's you take in your payment for your retail location, from your billing cycles from your vendors, from your AR/AP, like your accounts in, accounts out, like how are you going to pay things? In Maine, a lot of our internet comes through fiber lines or coaxial lines or Ethernet lines that are based on the poles. And in Maine, as everyone knows, a lot of our utilities come from poles. When the poles go down, as it did at Allagash last Thursday, you sometimes will lose internet access, and you need to have a plan to take payment. Because if you're a business, a retail business, or if you're a payment processor that needs to get in money or money needs to go out, you need to be able to have a system in place to facilitate the lack of internet, or the lack of wired internet, excuse me. So one thing that we found was, as we went more and more to the cloud-based systems, for example, our door key card system, and then also our retail payment system, when we're taking money for pints, is all cloud-based. The fiber line goes down, the coax line goes down, that goes away. So we quickly are able to look at what are the alternatives, and there is a lot of alternatives out here. Luckily in Maine you have wireless internet, you've got an advancement in cellular data, that's 5G, that you can take those payments, and make sure you have something like that. The last thing you want to do is be able to have a generator, turn your lights on, but not be able to take payment for something, or be able to pay someone, like a vendor that you need in your supply chain.
We're going to have Sean come and talk to a few other of our panels. He has a wealth of knowledge. He's thinking outside the box, which is part of resilience. So I'm so excited that we're talking about that today. So this is, before we go to the next question, this is where you start taking your pen and your paper and start getting active. We talked about COVID, and we talked about some of the interruptions, disruptions, some of the best practice in learning. One of the key things that COVID I kind of brought forth was, when they were looking at PPP, people were saying, I wish I would have known. I wish someone would have showed. I wish someone would have had that resource and told me that. I can't get in touch with my banker. I can't get in touch with my insurance broker. So a lot of that was building a toolkit, which is one of the reasons why I'm so excited about CEI's toolkit. You don't have to know everything, because we are trying to pressure forward and make money and bring in revenue so that we can pay for all the expenses. But you do have time to create a toolkit. So this is where we're about to come down the horn and start asking about resources and tools. So you want to make sure that you are taking note of these tools, and then we'll try to have a follow-up afterwards. But I would love to go down the horn and ask, and starting with you, Bob, consumer and small business. Because I think, how many hands of someone that knows a small business? Everybody, great. Bob, we want to strengthen our community, and we want to take away some key tools, resources, and knowledge. What are some of the resources that your agency offer that empowers households, entrepreneurs, and businesses as we think of the winter season coming, to keep front of mind?
Sure. So the Bureau has all sorts of guides on its website, or if you want to show up in Gardner, we can print them out for you. Questions to ask when you're purchasing commercial liability insurance, questions to ask when, to talk to your homeowner's insurance company or your auto insurance company. We'll also say that auto rates are the lowest in the entire country in the state of Maine. So you may think you're paying a lot, and you may may be meaningful, but consider yourself relatively lucky compared to other places in the country. And our homeowners insurance rates are among the top 10 lowest in the country. So a couple plugs on just the resilience of the market. We don't have the California problems or the Florida problems. We don't have a state fair plan, which means that no insurer wants to insure you when you get thrown to the state. Maine doesn't have one of those plans. It's one of the few states in the nation that doesn't need to, because we have a very competitive market. So we have lots of how-to guides on our website. I also would encourage you, we don't sell insurance, we regulate insurance. So the best person to talk to is your broker. And they're professionals, it's their job to look out for your best interest. And so I would direct you first to the brokers, but we do have lots of how-to guides on the Maine website, the Bureau of Insurance. The other thing I'll just say is, just back to LD1 in terms of resources, we're going to be rolling out a home resiliency grant program called Fortified Maine Homes, in which Maine residents, their primary residents, will be eligible for a grant to put a new roof on. The biggest the single weakest point of a home is the roof. 3/4 of all non-renewals, when an insurance company tells you, I'm not going to renew your policy, it's 75% of the time, it's because you need a new roof. So that's a need that we saw, and as part of LD1, we have $15 million that we're going to start rolling out in 2026. That's directly to Maine people to help them put a new roof on their home. So those are some of the resources we have at the Bureau.
That's awesome. Michael?
Absolutely. I have to give the unfortunate caveat of, if you're in Cumberland County, then these services are available to you. If you're in a different county, I don't know, your mileage may vary a little bit. We work with businesses as far as the planning portion of it that I mentioned. So if you want another set of eyes on your plan, if you want someone whose whole job is to think what's the worst thing that could happen today, to take a look at the plan and try and poke some holes in it, that's something we can do. If you don't have a plan and you want to develop a plan, we'd be happy to come out and we'll help you with that. We also provide facility assessments, specifically related to security. So we have 2 staff members who can do, they're actually the same assessments the federal government does, the same thing you get from CISA. We can come out and do those security assessments on different buildings. It's an area we're trying to get more into, is actually how can we better help small businesses and all businesses prepare within the county. So I'd also be interested at some point to hear what needs do you have as you go through it, because it's an area we'd like to grow into and make sure if there is a need out there that we're growing to meet that need. So if it turns out everyone's saying, hey, we talked a lot about supply chains, I don't even have my supply chain mapped, I don't know how to do that. That's a resource that if there's a lot of folks who need that, I don't see any reason that couldn't live at the county level and that be something we could provide and help you. You know, if you want your insurance policy assessed, I'll probably bump you somewhere else. But that sort of thing of figuring out what those gaps are, I'd be really interested to hear what they are.
Awesome. So for our final question, we wanted to kind of bring this home for the room. Sean, Patrick, you've given a lot of great tools and tips for us to think about as well. One of the things that we talked about earlier was the impact, and you had mentioned this. One individual is always a tragedy. If it's a community, it is certainly a disaster. So this is where we get a little soft, getting our soft skills. I would love for us to really start to think about the quality of life for each other, our households, our families. That's why I tell people, if we're not talking about climate, if we're not talking about environmental, we're not talking about these things. Small businesses, I had said earlier, is truly the heart of all communities, and we've seen that with a lot of disasters. So if we think about large-scale, hyperlocal community resilience, how do we all thrive here in Maine? What would you say to the audience today, that one takeaway? How can we all play a part in community resilience in this space? So this could be personal advice. I'll start with you, Patrick.
You know, following these storms, I was talking to a number of the commissioners of the Mills administration, and asked about the permitting process for rebuilding. And it revealed something that I think Maine has a problem with. And the Commissioner of Transportation said, this is great for us because we can rebuild and not receive the permits. We've been trying to rebuild a bridge over the Androscoggin River between Brunswick and Topsom for 10 years. And I think we have to change our mentality that change is necessary. I think we're very resistant to change, and change is coming to us. And we have to build the resilient infrastructure that is going to take communities to start saying yes, and start saying yes quickly to more resilient infrastructure. And yes, that's new bridges, that's new wharves, that really preserves our economy. But I'd push this room to really be open to that change.
For me and for Allagash, it's, we're a B Corp, so we're kind of looking long term at sustainability, and I think that's important for us as a small business and for other small business owners. Is in a disaster situation, you're thinking right in a minute, right in a moment, you're getting through it, right? But be a little bit more longer term thinking and more kind of just what can we do what's our impact? The impact may seem small from a small business perspective, but if all small businesses think the same way long term, is to reduce our impact in the environment, be a little bit more sustainable, in tandem with taking advantage of electrification opportunities in the state of Maine. Like, for example, we have a large warehouse that we have to keep warm. Rather than using gas, we actually went with commercial and industrial electric heat pumps. But that's a big commitment from Allagash because it's more expensive than traditional gas, but we do have advantage of Efficiency Maine and taking advantage of those programs, but it's a longer term view on helping ourselves, helping our community, helping our climate and sustainability, which in turn should, if we all do the same thing, help the whole ecosystem. But take a longer term view and be prepared.
I'd maybe offer, I'll throw it out as almost a word of hope and just say we're kind of lucky in Maine in that when there are these big disasters, we see people come out of the woodwork and want to help, right? Every time we push that big red emergency button, someone answers. And that's a really cool thing because that really doesn't happen everywhere. I've worked in multiple states. That does not happen everywhere. But it definitely happens in Maine, right? Where you get the person who just happens to have a snow plow and they start just plowing out their neighbors' driveways and stuff like that. I couch a lot of things in kind of the psychology of disasters because I'm a nerd like that. But it's interesting the way people volunteer and the way people help in disasters. Essentially, a disaster throws off your whole psychology and it creates this really odd, uncomfortable feeling of ennui that you've probably felt if you've ever woken up in the middle of the night to the sound of a water leak somewhere in your house, or God forbid your cat throwing up. It's the worst sound in the world, and you instantly pop right out of bed, right? That's that feeling of ennui. And one of the things that actually alleviates that can be service. It can be helping other people. So not necessarily fixing the problem even, because if it's a big hurricane, you can't really fix it, but helping people does. And so I'd kind of leave folks with the idea that if letting people help you helps them as well. So if you think you can just do it by yourself and you still have that little hesitation about forming your team, being part of your team helps every member of that team. So I'd leave with that.
I would just conclude by echoing a bit what Patrick said about thinking beyond sort of the borders of your town. Like, disasters don't care that the town of Boothbay is different from the town of Boothbay Harbor, is different from the town of Edgecombe, right? If you live where I do on that peninsula, we're all sort of collectively affected. And the permitting issue is an interesting one, right? So if the town of Topsom has a rule that you can only construct between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m., and the town of Brunswick has a rule that you only can construct between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m., that means the bridge can only be constructed between 9 and 3. And so thinking more broadly and not so myopically about your individual town and thinking about the region that we live in. I mean, Maine is proud of its local government, but I think sometimes that gets in the way of progress because the rules in one town affect the ability of another town to take action. And I think if we learn one thing, if I learned one thing, it's that we need to think more regionally about the issues that affect us and not be so town-centric, as difficult as that can be. I mean, I've worked in Maine, in the 80s doing regional planning, and it's very difficult to get towns to work together. But I think that those barriers are starting to get broken down a little bit, and towns think more, about the general area in which they live, as opposed to, well, I live in Saco and he lives in Scarborough. So I would just urge you to think more broadly about the needs of your broader community.
Awesome. So as we get ready to conclude, before we turn it over for about 1 or 2 quick questions, when we talked about the homework and some of the takeaways, I've been in this space for about almost 3 years. And I'll tell you, the first thing that I started learning is how can I apply this personally? Do I have an emergency preparedness plan in place? That kind of jogged me. I was like, no. So I think I went on Amazon and started just hitting everything. I need this, I need that, I need this. But how many people in place have an emergency preparedness plan at home? You guys are awesome. How many businesses have an emergency preparedness plan? And start thinking about how often have you looked at it. As I close for questions, one of the things I would leave you with, I tell folks a lot through all the disasters, the number one thing that I've learned is it's not information sharing. Today is not about sharing information. It's as a community, you have to start building a pattern of shared knowledge. What I intend for you to take away with the information and to do something with it so that we're empowered as a community is real. So for those that have emergency preparedness plan, when you're talking to the kids and we're doing soccer and we're like having that neighbor conversation, how do we be more intentional? That's what this is about. How do we be more intentional about conversations and how do we prioritize preparedness? We're in a time where we have to be intentional about this space, both personally and from a business perspective. So I want to leave you guys with that. Please make sure that you take advantage of some of the information, and let's give the panel a round of applause. Before we shift into what are you going to do? We got a lot of information. Now let's make it tactical. How are we going to do some real learning? I'm going to tell you for those that are here, we have until 10:30. I work along the East Coast. I would tell you I have never seen a toolkit on the East Coast. I talked to a lot of people, FEMA and SBA. We have not seen a very tangible, viable toolkit that's free to the community to be able to say, how do we start implementing some of these things and empower each other? We're going to do a breakout after this. And I'll turn it over to Eliza in a second. Please make sure that you stay, take advantage of that toolkit and information. That is something that you definitely want to make sure that you have coffee talk with. Any questions for our panel? I have a raffle for the first person that raises their hand. Ah, look at that.
Hi, good morning. My name is Emily and I'm an emergency manager, so I'm so excited to see some energy and discussion around this topic today. My question for the panel, we've heard a lot about insights about how to make businesses more resilient. We've talked about the need for community focus, regional focus, and towards the end of the panel we heard about individual preparedness. And I was wondering if you could offer any perspectives. What opportunities do you see for businesses to play in preparing individual employees for disasters? If you could offer any insights there.
Thank you. See Maya for your digital gift card. Panel?
I'll give a quick just what we do at Allagash. So we're a manufacturing facility predominantly, and we have retail locations. For manufacturing, we try our best to make it as safe as possible for an individual to come into work. Like if it's unviable because of the roads or the weather, the wind, the rain, whatever it is, the snow. Like we'll make accommodations that way and being flexible in our production schedule. And this is maybe echo other businesses that we have opportunities for people to work from home on the admin side, and then we also have opportunities to close and to shift hours in our retail locations to make sure that individuals that can, if they cannot get to work, that we can, flex with that from a business perspective. And then just offering just simple advice. We have a pretty robust engineering and maintenance department that if people want to come to us that typically don't kind of look at their houses in a way that you should, they come to us for advice, and we've got an open format at our work of hey, you should do this little thing, you should prepare yourselves before the storm comes. And also just simple communication within the company too, is that if we see that a storm or something is coming, we just do our best to prepare everyone for what could happen and what may happen, not just relying on, oh, it just did happen, so what are we doing now? It's more proactive rather than reactive.
I'll just add that, one thing that I am trying to do, we run a relatively lean shop. I have 62 employees. We regulate every piece of insurance that you have and then some. So we have a broad responsibility, but I'm trying to build redundancy into my team so that if a person needs to be out or wants to be out, that they don't feel like the work is just going to pile up until they get back. And so what I've tried to do is build in a little bit more redundancy in making sure that people, I had 2 people on my team, one of their parents died in the last week. So, I'm like, go, be with your family, don't worry, we'll take care of things. Do we miss them? Yeah. Will some of their work be piled up? Yeah, I'm sure it will be. But what I'm trying to do is instill in my folks a sense that they can leave, that the Bureau will continue to operate, and we'll move through. And I think that that's important in terms of helping people not rush back when they might want to take an extra day. So one thing I would leave you is just that maybe a little bit more of a collegial sense of redundancy in operations. It's easier said than done. I'm not completely there yet, but I am working on it.
Awesome. I'm about to turn it over to Eliza. One thing someone mentioned, if you're in emergency planning or emergency management in the room, can you raise your hand? I saw these 2, 1, 2, 3. Awesome. So we have a great network to lean into. So now I'll turn it over to Eliza Jacobs, who is the Associate Program Director, and she's going to start the facilitation around the Resilience Toolkit, CEI.
Ooh, thank you, panel.
Yeah, thank you so much to this amazing panel.
Does it have to? Do you have to slide it over?
Oh, I thought it was just. All right. While we're
Boom. Yep. Yeah, you do have to slide it over. Great.
getting this up on the screen. So my name's Eliza Jacobs. I am the Associate Program Developer on our Business Sustainability and Resilience team at CEI. And thank you. I know it's been a lot of listening, but hopefully fruitful for all of you.
I can't see because
Don't worry, Hannah, you weren't the only one.
I'm sorry, M&T Bank. I'm gonna move your sign real quick. Can't see the presentation all the way.
Okay. So CEI, as Emily mentioned earlier today, is a community development financial institution working to build a just, vibrant, and climate resilient future for all Mainers. And we do that through financial products and services, free business advising, and policy solutions. So please do feel free to utilize us as a resource. In terms of what inspired this toolkit and kind of why we're all here today, a lot of this has already been spoken about, so I really want to speed through this for the sake of time, but at CEI, we are lucky to be really tapped into and in close communication with and lots of relationships with the small business community here in Maine, and really heard loud and clear that there are a lot of tools available for our homeowners and municipal planning, community level planning, but something that is geared toward the small business community was really a gap, and we're excited to be launching this toolkit today as a way to help support your continued planning. So there are hard copies on the table, and there'll be a QR code for your
ability to download when we wrap up here and move into small groups. But what's in the toolkit is some background on the changes and challenges that we're experiencing in Maine, many of which we've heard about already today. There's a risk assessment that will allow you to kind of estimate what your risk might be, and some recommendations and additional resources to help support you in your planning. The risk assessment does use a few different online mapping tools, and so there's also some appendices that support you in utilizing those, and we'll be also uploading some video tutorials for using that later this week. So this is obviously too small to see. I'm going to zoom in on some of the different parts, but this is a look at what the risk assessment looks like. And what I really want to emphasize with this is that risk assessment, for the purposes of this toolkit, is not hard and fast rules. It's not cut and dry. It's really informed by your own risk tolerance. But the hope is that this provides some metrics and tools that allow you to estimate for yourself what really feels right to you. So everyone is different. Like, you may check a few things on the moderate risk list and a few things on the low risk list, but really feel that for your business, what's most important to you is to take the most conservative possible approach. And so you may decide to utilize all of the high risk recommendations. It's really meant to be flexible and customizable for whatever works for you and your business and your personal risk tolerance. I do want to highlight, especially because I think this really came up in the panel, this lower right-hand corner. If you are somebody who is well-resourced and truly low risk, the opportunity to be a resource to your community, to think about what you have to give in the event of a community-level disaster. And there are a lot of ways to do that, and that is a part of the planning process, as well as mitigating your own risk. So zooming in a little bit on some of these different metrics that we've put together. So for a low risk category, you would maybe not be relying so heavily on sectors that have risk of extreme weather impacts, such as agriculture, fisheries, forestry, or tourism. And again, not a hard and fast list. You may have folks in your supply chain that you know might be more heavily impacted. I know Sean spoke to regional differences, like maybe if you have folks out of state that you know it's harder to get product from. But somebody who's low risk might operate an online retail store that doesn't rely on local tourism and is pretty free from those impacts. Your product or business would not be significantly impacted by power loss, so maybe you operate from home and have a backup generator, or you have a flexible production schedule that means you can just shift until your power comes back on. Your town's social vulnerability index is categorized as low. This is a link in the digital toolkit, and each of these ones that are underlined will be links to different tools that you can go and assess on. And the social vulnerability index is really a community level assessment of, measurement of the ability to respond to large stressors. So it takes into account things like housing and transportation access and other resources and infrastructure that would be available. And so when you click on this, there's a list of all the towns in Maine, and you would be able to determine whether your town is in the low, medium, or high category. Culverts in your area, whether or not they're at risk of flooding. We're really lucky in Maine, as Hannah mentioned, as a part of Coastwise, and the Nature Conservancy has an amazing viewer that we'll take a look at in a second, where you can actually see in your town and in your area what selected culverts might be at risk of overtopping and impacting transportation. You might not be impacted by coastal flooding, your operations are not impacted by high heat, high winds, or freezes, and your risk of river flooding is low. You might also be able to continue operations normally during staff illness or injury. And I think this last one is really important, taking a look at your financial liabilities and risk, that you might have low operating costs, affordable debt, and you're not locked into long-term contracts or obligations. And as we go through, the list for the moderate and high categories are quite similar to the low risk list that we just went through in slightly more detail, but with escalating impacts for each of these things. So you might have a closer connection in your business operations to a nature-based sector. Power loss might be more challenging for you to overcome, and your social vulnerability index, culverts, river flooding, or coastal flooding would be more impactful to you. And also that you have some moderate operating costs that would make loan payments really rely on weekly operations, and so interruptions would have more significant impacts on your ability to meet contracts or debts that you might hold. And then in terms of staff illness or injury, really thinking not just really on the one-offs of somebody catching the flu, but a more significant event that might occur, what your level of resilience would be in staffing. And then in the high-risk category, again, similar, but just increasing in the impacts you might experience. And then in addition, kind of breaking out some of those different financial obligations at the bottom into having some significant weekly operating costs and little cash reserve, significant debt, or some long-term contracts or obligations to customers or vendors. I think another point here, especially around power loss, is the effects of potential freezing or refrigeration in your practices, and considering the ways that lost product might be a major impact. So taking a look at some of the different, I'm going to just go through a few example pages of the toolkit that's on the table in front of you. So we do offer different recommendations and resources depending on the risk category that you assess yourself to be in. And so it could be things such as creating an emergency contact list that's available to you and your employees so they know who to talk to in the event of an upcoming emergency, creating a communication plan so that everyone's on the same page about what the plan is, and then also creating and coordinating an emergency action plan. As you move through the toolkit, these kind of nest. So for a moderate risk business, in addition to the section for all businesses that we just took a look at one page of, you would consider all of those all business ideas, and then also in addition, these moderate risk businesses could also consider some additional ideas to further protect themselves. And so a couple of examples of that here are on investing in electric AC or heating systems and installing a backup generator. And then for our high-risk businesses, in addition to all of the other recommendations made throughout the toolkit, also taking into account some things like creating a product recall plan or looking into business interruption insurance. And again, these are just a few of the things in the toolkit just to give you a look at what the different format looks like and what some of the recommendations are. There are also a few things to recommend after a disaster and additional resources that you can reach out to for more information. The next thing that I do want to touch on is in the risk assessment, there are a few different places that we send you to utilize different mapping tools to really take a look at your location. And so to give you a look at what some of those are, here's an example of the culvert mapping tool. And what you do in this one, you can see all of the different culverts all over the state. You can go and just select your town. So if I were to select Brunswick, which is where CEI's headquarters are, it would then zoom right into that location. Once you're at that given location, you can actually select each of the individual culverts in your area. So if you know there's a particular route that your distribution company or that your customers or employees might typically utilize, you would have the ability to take a look and see if that is a road that's at significant risk of flooding in the event of a high water event. And when you actually click on the individual culvert itself, it gives you an idea of what that flooding probability is, actually how many, according to DOT, total daily cars are on it, and what detour length you would expect should that culvert actually fail in the event of a high water event. We also direct you over to some river flooding resources, and so this supports you in taking a look at your location to see what kind of river flooding you might be exposed to. So as you saw actually on the previous screen, all you have to do is go ahead and put in your address. I put in our CEI headquarters here, and I have a little bit of information that's in the toolkit written about what the kind of risk level you might expect would be. So you can see here the blue and the red and blue striped are some of the higher risk areas, and then the orange is the more moderate risk areas. and our CEI headquarters are all the way over here. So our building itself is not necessarily at risk, but the ability for folks who might be commuting from Topsom could be potentially at a higher risk, or travel would be more challenging to get over to us. And so it's not necessarily a high-risk location from a river floodplain perspective, but in terms of transportation could present some challenges. Another spot that I typed in was over in Bethel. I think a lot of us probably remember from the winter event that we had a couple years ago. Bethel and Nauru were hit pretty hard. And you can see here a difference in the flooding that they might experience or be at risk of experiencing. Actually blocks a road over here, blocks some roads up here, and blocks roads over here. And so accessing this site in the event of a flooding emergency would be extremely challenging, and definitely a higher risk location. I think the other thing too is it would be easy to look at this and say, well, the building itself is not at risk of flooding, so I don't need to worry about that. But there's a lot of local knowledge and experience from the recent events in this area, and I think that's something that is really important to take into account when using these kinds of resources, is your lived experience at your location and the experience of your employees, your vendors, and your municipality are just as important as these tools themselves, and I really encourage everyone to layer those lived experiences on top of the data that's available to you. And coastal flooding, just the last few things, as you know, Hannah tapped into this a little bit earlier, and we have this tool to view it through the state of Maine. And so when you go to utilize this resource, you're able to use this search icon here and put in your address. And I put in our Portland address for the Portland CEI office, and it just pops down this option right here. It zooms us right in. When it first zooms you right in, it might look like nothing's showing up, but if you actually just zoom out a little bit, you can see here that the visualization starts to show up. So this is current levels, and it's important to take note. There are these notes throughout the map that offer a little bit of additional information. So this one here actually informs you that some of the ways that this overlays over the pier has to do with the LiDAR imaging, and doesn't necessarily mean that this is going to be a flooded area at this time. When you select this icon over here, it opens up the opportunity to take a look at these different map layers. And when you look at these different map layers, I highly recommend utilizing the ones that are in our state of Maine planning. So we are committed to managing 1.6 feet of sea level rise by 2050, and so you can take a look here that this additional green comes into play, and you can see the ways that the Portland waterfront would be affected as we move forward. At 3.9 feet and at 8.8 feet, which we're preparing to manage by 2100. So this is a tool that would allow, should you have coastal exposure in your business, to take a look at what level of sea level rise might affect you at the highest astronomical tide.